The Spin-off Podcast Network. You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Going Global, a Business is Boring pop-up series brought to you by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. NZTE wants to help more Kiwi businesses reach their global potential. Visit getthere.nz to find out more. And now, here are your hosts, Brianne West and Simon Pound.
Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome to our special pop-up series Going Global, where we meet some of Aotearoa's most successful and inspiring exporters to find out the secrets to their success and bust some myths along the way. I've been talking to exporters for the last 5 years, including my co-host for today, Brianne West, who you will know as the founder and CEO at Aotearoa, who are the global leader in the concentrated beauty bar space. They have stopped more than 20 million plastic bottles from being made, among a whole lot of other cool stuff. Thanks for being here, Brianne. What are we up to with this series?
Thanks for having me. Well, Aotearoa is a long way from anywhere else, and we're a small market. So if we and our companies want to grow, we need to sell to the world. But something interesting we have seen is that not all companies selling to the world are identifying as exporters, and that while business in Aotearoa is now looking a lot more like the face of New Zealand, exporting is still skewing towards that older, more traditional style of business. You know, older, more male, and more likely to be the primary products like meat and milk. So the questions we want to answer are, why aren't more of these amazing, incredible, innovative businesses we are creating, why aren't they exporting? Why don't the people who are exporting think that they are? And how can we change this? We're speaking to 6 great exporters over 6 weeks to find out, like our guest today, Kendall Flutey.
Kendall describes herself as a reformed accountant who trained and worked at a Big Four company before changing tack for a purpose-led business to help increase financial literacy for students. Today, her company Banqer helps over 200,000 kids across Australasia. Students who use the program come out 10% more financially literate, a number that if every kid across the country could achieve, would add billions to our national wealth and financial health. To talk their approach to business, purpose, and finding and setting your own path to export growth, Kendall Flutey joins us now. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
So good to talk to you. I know you call yourself a reformed accountant. I like that term. I've got a few people at Aotearoa who have escaped the Big Four. So how did you decide that you were going to do that? You know, what was the motivation, and was it a scary first step to take?
It really was. It was quite a daunting and overwhelming time in my life. I think the issue was I'd never really been intentional about what I wanted to do. So I've just been on this educational conveyor belt and spat out at the end as an accountant, right? And then I get into the workplace and realize, I don't really fit in here. So as soon as I had that realization, I felt really uncomfortable being in that environment and was sort of looking for an exit strategy immediately after the first week of induction. But I had to take up a bit of time to
That's quick.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, right? To build up the courage to do so. And I think I handed in my resignation after 6 months. So that was quite a lot of time building up courage.
That's a long time to hate something.
It is. It wasn't the best time of my life. But look, I think I was also looking for a next step, and that's where I was getting a bit stuck, especially being overwhelmed with Big Four sort of hours. So I actually quit in the end with nothing, no plan B, which was probably the best thing I could have done for myself.
So how did you launch into the business? How did you create it?
Yep, so a few more steps between quitting accounting and what I get to now. I retrained as a software developer. And then I landed what essentially was my dream job in technology at this amazing Wellington-based tech company. And then, only then, when I felt sort of like safe and in a really supportive, empowering environment, did the idea for what I do now, Banqer, come along.
How do you describe what you do now, and what's the kind of big vision of it?
Cool. So I'm a co-CEO of Banqer, and Banqer is a financial education company. We build tools for schools to make kids better with money. So we've got 2 interactive simulative platforms where kids can kind of just get their hands dirty pretending to be adults managing finances. So it might be as simple as a mock bank account, or they may be investing on our fictitious stock exchange. It all feels really real to them. So it's that experiential learning that will hold them in good stead for when they enter the real world.
Such a brilliant idea and so necessary. You are a purpose-led company, but for profit, right?
Correct, yeah.
Do you find that, I know sometimes I feel that people don't think those things work, that you can have purpose and yet still be financially sustainable, right? And there's a bit of tension there. Do you come across that?
Yeah, definitely. Some people think they're mutually exclusive, right? And that's an education piece. But I've been on a journey with Banqer for a while now, and I think over the last few years, my exchanges with people who are confused has been decreasing. But there definitely is a sort of construct in people's mind that you can't do good and make money. So it's always a fun conversation to have.
And is that something, that you've found as well in the business, Brianne?
Yeah, there's this weird profit is evil. I understand why people believe that, but if you're not financially sustainable, you're not going to create any impact either. So it's something people need to kind of understand and get over.
Yeah, I always wonder if more the question shouldn't be, what are you doing running a company that isn't thinking about delivering some kind of positive purpose?
Exactly. A company that its sole purpose is making money is a company that is outdated and will not engender customer loyalty and hopefully will be extinct in a couple of years, maybe 10 years.
I totally agree. And I think your timeline isn't too ambitious, actually. 10 years. We're starting to see it. Consumers and the next generation are demanding more than just profit. They want a bit of purpose and substance to the entities and organisations they engage with. So, yeah, I like your thinking, Brianne.
Yeah, tell us about that purpose and what's the kind of problem with financial literacy that you can solve?
So financial literacy and illiteracy will mean something different to all of us individually. It's a $1 billion problem globally. If we think about individually, we can be vulnerable to being financially misled, or perhaps we're engaging in negative financial decision-making, like getting in debt we can't service at one end of the spectrum. So there's a protection piece. But actually, if we're financially illiterate, we're also not maximizing our opportunities. We're maybe not thinking about, like, what does the future look like for me? How can I prepare for my retirement? How can I engage in investing and other opportunities that are going to prepare me for financial well-being, really? So that all builds up at an individual level as well, where we get these societal effects that mean there's tax consequences, welfare structures, good things that are going to support everyone and aim for equality. But financial literacy can actually be tracked back to being the sort of root cause, or lack thereof, financial illiteracy, the root cause of a lot of systemic issues in our society. So from a purpose perspective, Banqer exists to prepare the next generation for their financial future. We want to make sure that everyone feels prepared to engage in the financial system that we actually all have to enter. We don't have a choice, really. You kind of have to engage with money, even if you don't believe in capitalism. There is some dependency on our financial system, and we just want to make sure everyone knows the rules of the game they're going to have to play.
It's such an interesting space, hey, because financial independence, or being kind of in a good position, can lead to kind of like personal sovereignty or group sovereignty, and also can lead to independence for people who've traditionally earned less or not been in charge of family finances and stuff, and so people can escape bad situations or choose life on their terms. Like, it can mean huge things in a person's life. Hey, it's not just kind of like having a better bank balance.
That's so true. Like, when we look at the research and the evidence, not only, unfortunately, are wahine women and Indigenous communities and disabled people actually most at risk of financial illiteracy. We see patterns as well around how they're underrepresented or overrepresented in really negative ways statistically. But I think, like, aside from that, when we think about the ability for your financial capability or stress or whatever you want to frame it as, the impact that can have on your health and your well-being more broadly, there was an interesting piece of research out recently that talked about the relationship between financial well-being and stress. And that's going to not only affect you in your financial world, that permeates to like everything we do. So yeah, it's a really critical area that I don't think is necessarily easy to solve for by any means, but it's what I get to spend most of my time trying to contribute to.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, I was talking about, it's going to sound maybe a bit weird, but it was a few weeks ago, I was actually talking to my dad about financial literacy and about Banqer. And he was saying he didn't even know what his dad made. They never discussed money in their household. And that did translate to his beliefs when they were raising me. Mum and dad just simply didn't talk about money or finance or anything until I got quite a lot older. And as a result, I think I'm not particularly money-wise. And Atika's taught me a lot about finance, but without it, I'm not sure where I'd be. But you obviously spent a few years growing the company in New Zealand. How and why and when did you start taking the leap to the offshore markets?
Yeah, so we did. We launched Banqer in New Zealand in 2015, nationally throughout all primary schools here. I would love to say that our foray into our first international market was super planned and intentional, but it wasn't. Funnily enough, NZTA actually supported Banqer to go and speak at a fintech conference in Sydney. We had limited aspirations for the market, certainly didn't have a growth strategy there. But we pitched at this event and it was sort of a demo day thing and we ended up winning. And in the crowd were a lot of financial services firms. And at the time, our business model revolved around partnerships. So corporates supporting us financially to do what we wanted to do and making the platform fully accessible in schools at no cost. Yeah, as it turned out, there was an awesome company called NetWealth, their founder or MD, Matt, and he sort of came up to us and said, we love what you do. We love what you're doing in New Zealand. We'd love to support you to do this in Australia. And that was really the start of us turning over in our mind the possibility of exporting what we do here in Aotearoa in an Australian context.
Way that you have chosen to set up your company and the goals that you have are not traditional kind of like VC growth at all costs kind of approaches, eh? Can you talk us through a couple of the kind of the things that are important to you and different and special?
Yeah, I think it's a really astute observation. We've been fully bootstrapped to date, and that's allowed us to retain our values wholeheartedly. And I think, for me at least, as a social enterprise, I think it was the intent behind that was as much about me learning to navigate the social enterprise space and how to juggle that tension between profit and purpose really like appropriately from my perspective. As it was just we potentially weren't in the right position to be engaging with VCs and scaling the business in that way anyways at the time. So some of the decisions I think we've been able to make are around supporting those communities I spoke about earlier who statistically are shown to be proportionately more impacted negatively through financial literacy. So like we've been able to work with Kura Kaupapa for our primary school platform for Banqer, PKK, which was a significant investment for us with if you were just looking at profit maximisation, it'd be quite challenging to make that all stack up. But from an impact perspective, that was significant for us. And also as a Māori founder, that was really meaningful and I think kind of essential for me to take the business on that journey as well. So yeah, that's just one small example, but I think it's the totality of how we've behaved over the last 7 years that has meant we haven't necessarily had the ARR of a fast growth startup of 7 years, but we've had, we've grown a stable revenue base that's meant we're sustainable, and we've actually been able to hold on to our values and create the impact that we wanted, which, I don't know, I found it really fulfilling and rewarding. And Brianne, I'd actually be really interested in sort of your perspective. I know you've sort of done it on a larger scale and maybe injected some meaningful capital along the way as well. But yeah, I think that retaining the values has been really key for me.
It's a question I get asked a lot, particularly so in October 2020, we took on a big investor for a lot of money, and people naturally seem to assume that now we're evil. And I'm fairly sure we're not evil. We haven't compromised on any of those values, but it is a perception that once you take an investment, and I can absolutely see why, because we dance a dance with loads of VCs and PE funds, and They say all these wonderful things up front, and push comes to shove, you look at paperwork and think, oh, you are actually evil. All right, cool. And where we got in the end in this, it's more of a family office than anything else who partnered with in the end, and they're super duper values led, and
awesome.
I have a lot more control than probably other people would do with my shareholding level, and that's the only way I would ever have allowed that to happen, because you're absolutely right. You have to, those values are what you get up in the morning for, what your team works so hard for, and what your customers and your clients believe in, right? If you change them, you'll fundamentally change your business, and you're no longer creating that purpose and that impact. So
true.
Not worth it.
Yeah, I love it. And we'll be back in a moment to hear more about doing it your own way, what exporting means today, and some insights that you might like to know if you're thinking about going global. We said earlier that exporting looks a lot more like the old traditional New Zealand business. What does that mean, Brianne?
I mean, it's bananas that women are seriously underrepresented when it comes to export. Around 28% of our goods companies in Aotearoa are led by women. But when we look at goods exporters, that number drops to 15%.
What could it do for New Zealand if all of the cool, or even just more of the cool women-led companies in this country did get to exporting?
Just imagine. New Zealand Trade and Enterprise wants to support more people to reach their global potential.
So if you're a woman in business and this kōrero has got you thinking about what you have to offer beyond our borders, get in touch with NZTE. To find out how they can help you get there, head to getthere.nz/woman. We're here with Kendall Flutey from Banqer, discussing exporting, which is something we all know New Zealand needs to do more of. But like that interesting fact that we've found kind of in the backbone of this podcast, is that not everyone who is running interesting businesses are thinking themselves as exporters and are getting out there and getting the help that they could to grow and do great things. And so, really interested to hear from you, Kendall. Like, do you consider yourself an exporter, or what do you kind of make of being an exporter?
Do I consider Banqer an exporter? Yes, but I think it's probably only something I would have confidently said yes to in the last few years or couple of years. But we have actually been actively driving revenue from international markets for sort of double that.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but whenever I think about the word exporter, I always think, milk, meat, big conglomerates shipping stuff offshore. Did you have any other preconceived notions about exporting, what it would be like, whether it would be really hard, whether it would be easy? Because I think a lot of people feel that it's almost out of reach, and we want to, knock that down.
Yeah, I think software is a really interesting concept when you think about exporting. You're totally right, Brianne, in terms of the milk and the wood and the very primary industry-focused exporting mentality. But then when you just think about bits and bytes through a computer, that's a totally different notion from an export perspective. I think I was always overwhelmed by the idea of exporting really intentionally. I maybe thought it was in the too hard basket. So we never necessarily set that strategy and defined that strategy from the start. We kind of just did it. And I'm actually glad that it sort of rolled out the way it did, because I think in a sense, we got to take baby steps. And by the time I looked at where we were, I was thinking, oh, well, we've actually achieved quite a lot. And given this momentum behind us, surely forging on is the right choice.
Yeah. And what kind of support and help? I mean, you mentioned before getting support from NZTE to head to that demo day and stuff. Like, what kind of support have you found, or how have you got past some of those barriers around exporting?
Yeah, people, talking to other founders who have been exporting, particularly those in the software space or in the market we're trying to grow in, has been really useful. And I don't think I've always done that extremely well. I think, again, in the last few years, I've really understood how to share value between founders and extract like learnings and understandings and actually apply them effectively to our business. It's been a real experience. But outside of like my networks, our partners have been critical to our growth in Australia. I mentioned them before, NetWealth. They basically fund Banqer Primary, our primary school platform, to be used throughout all Australian primary schools at no cost. And we now actually have another product which is in high schools, and that's user pay. So the schools pay, that's our scalable product. But that brand awareness piece that our partners supported us with by entering into the market has been fantastic. And they also were just there to answer what I consider the dumb questions. Like there's so much structural stuff. Brianne, you'll know all about it, the legal, the accounting, like, all the things that are just
horrible.
Yeah, a bit boring, but you kind of got to get them right, huh?
It's expensive if you don't. Yep.
Yeah, and privacy when we're talking about software and kids as well. So our partners it was like having a team 100 times the size as we are. And then there's the likes of the professional services, be it the ones you're paying for or the government support. We've been so fortunate with NZTE throughout our journey, particularly in the last sort of 18 months, as we look to launch our secondary school platform across the ditch as well. They've helped us be really intentional in a way that I sort of touched on before we hadn't been to date.
Have you had to change a lot about your sort of base programs for the Australian market versus the New Zealand one?
No, contextualisation for us, I mean, compound interest here in New Zealand is kind of the same as in Australia. So the main contextualisation from a platform perspective is superannuation, KiwiSaver. That's the big change, and it's kind of a semantic one. A few nuts and bolts changing as well. The biggest difference in our markets are curriculum from a product delivery perspective, ticking the right boxes for teachers, and then just all the market nuances, which is so hard to even if you invest in research and understanding the market, sometimes it's not until you get there and you're talking to 10 teachers, you realise, that just really doesn't resonate with that audience the way it does over here.
Yeah, the best thing, and I know it's not accessible to everyone, but the best thing you can do if you're trying to develop a market is go there. But, of course, that is leave people out.
Has there been anything that's been kind of more challenging than you'd expected, or any moments where you thought that this might not work?
So New Zealand is a fantastic software playground from my perspective to a point. We've got this really interesting population size, which means you can push an idea out there and actually the network's effect get it out there quite quickly. And we saw that in primary schools, like we've been used by a majority, so over 50%, 55% of all New Zealand primary intermediate schools. That's awesome. But then you've got a scalability issue in tech, I guess, that we've saturated that much the market so quickly.
That sounds like a great problem.
Good
like
problem
how
to
cool,
Yeah.
how cool is that? Like after being so, because it's such a brave move, like you're mentioning right at the beginning, when you've kind of invested so much of your kind of self in, going down a certain path, and then to leave that without knowing where you were going to go from the accounting, to then have your idea be in half of all schools and helping, I assume half of all kids to get ahead further.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. But the thing is, that's cool in a New Zealand context. And you can the network effect is really powerful. And Brianne, I'm sure you've engaged a lot on like speaking at events and trying to get the good word out there, right? And it's really tiring, but it's rewarding and valuable. I've just found in Australia, cutting through the noise, it's a totally different beast. And that strategy of organic growth and the network's effects, it's a lot harder to ignite. And that was probably the biggest learning curve for me. I naively thought we could transplant. It's probably a lot of national goodwill as well, brand familiarity. I thought we could transplant that into the international market, and boy, was I wrong.
Australia is an interesting market, and actually I would argue it's one we find the hardest too.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of entrepreneurs from here just think you can shoot straight across to Australia with a cookie cutter product, but there's not many that works for. We found America easier, and I don't know why that is, but you're right. We struggle to get some cut through at times, and it's bizarre.
I remember Dion Nash said something really interesting to me about Triumph and Disaster, his brand going into Australia, and he said, we put all our effort going straight to LA first, because if you go to Australia from New Zealand, you're kind of like a sad cousin. But if you go and you go to LA, you're this interesting New Zealander. And then if you've succeeded at any scale in LA, then Australian things are really interested in that in the way that they might not be interested in the New Zealand thing. So he was really purposeful to go, so I'm going to go and try and give it a nudge in London and LA before I give it a nudge in Sydney and Melbourne.
That's a very interesting point.
Fascinating. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
If there was one, for people who are listening to this who want to go out and export, they may be thinking, it's a bit hard. Is there anything you would do differently or do exactly the same in your journey that would be interesting to other people?
There are lots of things I would do differently. We launched our primary school platform in Australia maybe in 2018 maybe. Can't really put my finger on that timeline. But quite a while ago. So we have had a presence in Australia and been scaling over there for a while and tried to right some of those wrongs. But our launch into high schools at the start of this year in Australia has been markedly different to that first experience. And I guess we've been trying to apply our learnings. So I've kind of had that second shot at exporting for the first time again. And I think one of the big things was that strategic piece for me and the support of the likes of NZT and a bunch of other people who can make sure that you're analysing the market from all angles and taking the right operational first step. I think last time we were very partner-driven. This time, which is fine, that was the main source of our revenue. But at this stage, now we're driving revenue from schools, so that immediate connection means we're user-driven in terms of how we're engaging and entering the market. And that's been like a transformational shift for us. It's sort of strategically dictated where we've invested our resources, what sort of talent and capability we've grown within the team, and also just sort of some of those key fundamental decisions that will set us up to scale later on have been completely different to the first time round. But that said, all of that said, while I think you should have a really solid strategy and get support alongside you, I do think it's all about the first step. And if you can just take that first step, whatever it looks like to you, you don't have to think A to Z, like what is A to B for you? Is it just shipping one product to one customer? If you can do that, I think it will really build confidence in those out there who think this is too overwhelming.
Totally. Break it into tiny bite-sized pieces. Like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
So that first step is really important because you're right. You do then gain confidence the next one and the next one and the next one, and all of a sudden you're a multi-million-dollar exporter. It's that easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like that confidence and experimental mindset. Like if I go back to when I first started Banqer, it was just a series of experiments, and majority of them failed, but we ran with the ones that actually worked. I think trying to apply that mentality with a strategic structure that brings all of the experience over the last few years that you've been developing and building your capability in Aotearoa. How do you retain that mindset but also apply your learnings? I think that's been an awesome experience for me to go through that over the last 18 months.
Ah, lovely. And as a final thought, what is the shape of where Banqer is going? So you've got stuff happening in Australia. I imagine there are a lot of young people around the world who, if they were set on a better path with their financial literacy, could have better results for everyone. Have you got kind of goals to go further? Or is this something I really have loved the way that you've been so intentional to keep things at a size that you like. Like, yeah, what's your current thinking?
Awesome. Yeah, I think I agree with your sentiment. There are people everywhere who don't have the financial literacy they need to thrive in this world. And ultimately, Banqer wants to support them, actually outside of the school gates as well. So we think if you missed out on financial education at school, then we're really excited about the opportunity to engage with those cohorts down the track. We have been intentional about keeping things maintainable, but at the same time, we've grown a team in our capability. So we think our breadth and our capability is broader than it has been ever before. So at the end of the day, we want to be serving quality financial education on a global scale. And one of the big shifts for us actually happening right now, so it's been a bit hectic, is we are looking for capital for the first time, and we're engaging with a few of the right people. So Brianne, it was awesome to hear your experiences that it can go really well too, to take us to that sort of that next magnitude.
Good luck. That's an awesome journey to go on.
Yeah, can't wait to see where you take it next. And thank you so much, Tanakwe. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Kia ora.
So good to talk to you.
Yeah, that was rad. Like, so cool to hear from Kendall Flutey there from Banqer. And quite a different approach to exporting and to building a company. And it's been really cool over these last 6 weeks to hear from all of these different people in all these different ways. But what kind of themes are coming through, or what are we hearing?
That's the amazing thing, is we've talked to 6 different people with very different businesses, and yet there has been some really common themes. And I think my favourite has been being authentically who you are will still lead to success. You're taught that you have to fit into a certain box to do business the right way, and these amazing entrepreneurs show that that's not at all the case. Be authentically who you are, and you have no idea where you'll end up.
I love the way that doing it on your own terms was different for everyone. Like, it's not just kind of one way to be unconventional. So the way that Laura was building her business versus the way Karen Walker would approach things, there are themes there. But what I was really hearing was, you're not going to find a how-to. You just have to get in there and do it.
Just jump in, boots and all, and give that first step, for sure.
Yeah, and taking the first step, that's the other thing we heard heaps, Like, there's that idea that you just have to get started. And so for some people, it might involve getting over to the market and finding out more. But for others, it's like, just release it, or just do an interview, or just find the people overseas who might be able to help you and get in and learn. And it's not something where, you suddenly become an exporter and you get like a badge or something. It's more something that you just do and get better at and improve.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about Aotearoa is how you can reach out to almost anyone, or they will reach out to you actually, and they will try and help in any way they can. It feels overwhelming moving into becoming an exporter, but there is a lot of help out there, and it will often start with just an email, a phone call, a chat.
Yeah, like once you get started, if you are finding that like it feels like there must be a better way, there probably is. Yeah. And so there are people, like NZTE, quite obviously, who are set up to help people exporting. And it doesn't matter if you're thinking about it, if you're just doing a tiny amount of revenue, if you're doing a lot of revenue, they're there to help people who are selling things overseas. So yeah, get in touch and get involved. Thanks for joining and doing this for the last few weeks, Brianne. It's been real fun.
It's been a real pleasure. Certainly not something I've ever done before, but I have really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for making it so easy and fun.
You're a star, and thank you so much to everyone who's been part of the podcast series, to Kendall Flutey today, to everyone else. Big thanks to you, Brianne, for being co-host. Thank you for listening, and for everyone who helps make this happen, like Te Aihe Butler, our producer. Do follow Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what we do, rate and leave a review. It really helps. E noho rā.
You've been listening to Going Global, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. It was hosted by Brianne West and Simon Pound. It was produced by Te Aihe Butler, with content management by Rachel LaRue and series production by Jane Yee. Special thanks to our partnerships editorial team of Elisa Rivera, Alice Webb-Liddell and Simon Day. If you want to know how New Zealand Trade and Enterprise can help you take your business to the world, visit getthere.nz today.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.